And we're back in the studio like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Sunday late afternoon here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today is Joe Pesci's 82nd birthday. And Joe Pesci is another one of those people who is an outlier, a unicorn, in a profession filled with them. But he is a different type. He is an enormously talented musician, first off, and he is a brilliant film actor with a very particular screen presence which lends itself beautifully to both comedy and drama. And the easiest thing to kind of highlight and focus on to try to explain, if such things are even explainable, how he can be so effective in madcap, zany, screwball comedy type of stuff and be deadly, literally, figuratively, symbolically, deadly serious in two movies shot very, very close, not quite back to back, but in that ballpark. So Joe Pesci was a musician, and he was really good. You know, there's a version of The Matrix in which he doesn't ever get into acting and he just becomes, a doo-wop era, super successful, Frankie Valli, that kind of thing. He and Frankie Valli at a certain point in time were pretty close. And, the Clint Eastwood adaptation of the Broadway musical, it's funny, I'm blanking on the name, but nobody could get tickets. Nobody could get tickets for seemingly a year. The movie's okay. It's not great, but I didn't know, and I'm a movie fan, but if somebody had come up to me 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, and had said, "Did you know Joe Pesci was a musician?" No, I didn't know Joe Pesci was a musician, because it isn't the first thing that someone would necessarily lead with when talking about his career. If they're interviewing him, doing a sort of, Sunday Times profile, it would probably come up, but I didn't know. And there are some great pictures of him with the big kind of pompadour style hair. But when you think of him, he's had 3 Oscar nominations in his career. All 3 nominations, 1 win, were in films directed by Martin Scorsese. The first being Raging Bull in 1980, the second being Goodfellas, 1990, and the third being The Irishman, a film that I don't entirely like. It's a movie of such high quality that I would tell people to see it. And if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, the score is in the 90s. It is a very well-made film, and a lot of people had issues with the CGI, although the CGI on Pesci is very subtle, and it wasn't as distracting as with De Niro, where I just don't think it worked. But my issue with that film is the film wasn't that interesting. The story was not that interesting to me. So the CGI didn't work, but I wasn't as engaged by the story. Pacino gets to do a lot of his kind of standard 90s bag of tricks where he screams and yells a lot. I was just waiting for him to shout, "She's got a great ass and you've got your head all the way up it," because it's a very broad 90s style Pacino performance on the order of Devil's Advocate, Heat, Scent of a Woman, even City Hall. I'd forgotten about that one with Al, where, "Were we not great once? Can we not be great again?" Absolute gold. But The Irishman, to me, Joe Pesci is magnificent. Now, he's duking it out with fellow Oscar winners in Big Al and Mr. De Niro. He's the one you remember. His performance, and he hadn't been in a major film since The Good Shepherd in 2006, and he really hadn't worked that much since the 90s. He did stupid comedy, Eight Heads in a Duffel Bag, which I know a lot of people, it's kind of a cult film, really like it. Oh, it's a riot. David Spade. I didn't think that it was funny. And Gone Fishing with his old running buddy, Danny Glover, that wasn't very good. And he had Jimmy Hollywood before that, which bombed. But Joe Pesci, you just have to look at basically a 1.5-year stretch, get an idea of just what a powerhouse talent, what an almost generational talent he is. And somebody who clearly, with all of the gaps and stepping away and, well, I might be retired, because it took a lot of cajoling from Bobby D and Martin Scorsese to get Pesci to come out of retirement. He didn't really want to do it. I think they were bugging him for a couple of years to get him to do that. So he's not somebody who feels like he can't do life without acting full-time or close to full-time. But Joe Pesci had kind of been away from big studio filmmaking since Raging Bull. Now, Raging Bull is one of those movies that I respect. It is a very difficult watch, even though I'm a boxing historian. Jake LaMotta, great fighter. 6 fights with Sugar Ray Robinson, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Top 10 most famous fights in boxing history. Ray was just absolutely fucking pulverizing Jake. Pulverizing him. And LaMotta wasn't going to go down. He was just one of those stubborn guys that you pretty much had to almost transport him to the canvas. You like in a straitjacket. The guy just didn't drop. He didn't drop unless he was paid to do so. But Pesci in that film is a match for De Niro. And De Niro's performance as Jake LaMotta is, it's maybe not Travis Bickle, but it's close. The physical transformation, the way he changes his vocal inflections, it's really some of De Niro's best work. But Pesci matches him. He's great as the brother. But then you move ahead in time, and Joe, he did Easy Money with Dangerfield. I mean, it's a funny movie, but it's a little bit beneath Joe Pesci's, ability, if you ask me. And he had kind of gone under the radar, and I'm going to admit something that is not really that good for somebody, alleged lifelong film geek. I really wasn't that familiar with him when Lethal Weapon 2 opened, and my dad and I saw it in theaters opening weekend. Dad, surprisingly, had been a big fan of the first one. Huge fan. I mean, it's a Gen X, one of our kind of standards. But I knew of Joe Pesci. I had seen brief clips, hadn't watched Raging Bull all the way through. I was 15 at the time. And my parents, they still had a little bit of a thing with, well, you're not supposed to watch rated R movies. So I hadn't seen Raging Bull other than, a couple of clips here and there. So Joe Pesci was more or less an unknown commodity to me as we settled in to watch Lethal Weapon 2. He steals the movie from 2 alpha performers in Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. It is their movie. But Joe Pesci is the most memorable character in the film. As Leo gets, it is an electric supporting performance. And compare Pesci from a comedic perspective, because a year and a half later, a little less than a year and a half later, when Home Alone opened, Home Alone actually opened after Goodfellas, but Goodfellas, I'm pretty sure, was shot before. There was, not surprisingly, it took Scorsese a long time to edit that movie and get everything together. But if you do a comparison, Pesci's comedic performance in Lethal Weapon 2, although his character he's a criminal, he's somebody who skims money from one source to another source and, kind of split the difference. He is a likable criminal because he doesn't really want to hurt anybody. He's not violent. He is not that kind of thing, although he probably would be sent to maximum security if somebody caught him doing some of the shady dealings that he's involved in. So his character is a comedic character, even though his head might be on the chopping block. In fact, it is, because he's a witness. He's not really in the witness protection program, but he's turning state's evidence of some sort, and there are people who want to bump him off, would be how I would explain it. And it's up to our intrepid Martin Riggs and Roger Murtaugh to protect him, and they don't like him, but he kind of wins them over because he is such a character, and they realize he's not a terrible guy. He just happens to be a criminal, but he's likable. He's always going out of his way to help, and there's an incredible scene where he's actually staying briefly at Mel Gibson's kind of beachfront mobile home, and the place is a pigsty, and he takes it upon himself to clean the place up. And it's a scene that comes out of nowhere, but it's like he doesn't want to even be in this place if it's not clean, so he cleans. He doesn't look like he would be a neat freak, but it's just a little character beat that Pesci pulls off. So that's a comedic performance. And Home Alone, he plays one of the wet bandits, and he's fantastic, opposite Daniel Stern as the other guy, Marv and Harry. It's not the same kind of comedic performance. the character in Lethal Weapon 2 is, quite frankly, a much nicer guy than who he plays, Marv, in Home Alone. Because in Home Alone, he seems to be willing to kill an 8-year-old boy. That's pretty ghastly. But it's still a comedic performance. The way he smiles, the line readings, everything he does in Home Alone. Now, I'm a big Daniel Stern fan as well, but I think Pesci walks away with that movie too. The moment in the film towards the end where Daniel Stern is freaking out because he thinks the kid is going to call the police, and what are they going to do? Because he has parachuted and kind of, made it into the treehouse. He's going to call the cops. Just the way Joe Pesci goes, from a treehouse! Cinematic gold. So you take those two funny, but not the same kind of funny performances, because you have the screwball farce of Home Alone, the kind of almost, it could have been PG-13 with some of the booby traps, the kind of nasty edge of some of the tricks that the kid pulls on the wet bandits, and the fact that they're not just having fun with this kid trying to rob this house. They have malicious intent. Whereas in Lethal Weapon 2, Leo wants to do his thing, not get murdered, and if he can help Riggs and Murtaugh along the way to get rid of these South African scumbags, so much the better. But then you watch Goodfellas. And it would be an interesting experiment for somebody who only knows the name of Joe Pesci and isn't really familiar with his work to watch Lethal Weapon, well, assuming they've seen the first one, Lethal Weapon 2 and Home Alone. Watch those two back to back. Comedic performances, him hitting his marks perfectly and getting laughs where you're not sure what other actors would be able to elicit humor from these particular situations, with the facial expressions, with his hair. Why are you dressed up like a chicken? All that stuff is great. But then you show them Goodfellas. The same actor, probably a couple of months in real life difference from when he shot Home Alone versus when he shot Goodfellas. The character of Tommy DeVito, despite being somewhat diminutive in size, he is terrifying. He is one of the scariest characters that I have ever seen in a movie. I'm not sure if he's a sociopath or a psychopath. I don't know that he is either, and that makes it even more frightening. Hannibal Lecter, if facing Tommy DeVito, would turn around and run away. And he would say, this guy is crazy. I don't want anything to do with this lunatic. And yet somehow, Pesci imbues him with the slightest bits of humanity. The occasional smile, the way that he deals with his mother, and the fact that he can play nice. He doesn't want to, but he is capable of having an evening barely without violence. But the threat of violence always being there. And the scene, of course, that everyone remembers is How Am I Funny? Do I Amuse You? With Ray Liotta. And, Liotta, from a certain point of view, gets the short shrift because he's fantastic in that film. But he's overshadowed by Pesci. And Joe Pesci, we know he's a character off screen. I shouldn't say that. Most people know he's a character. He's a really good interviewer. He's had fun on Saturday Night Live. Jim Breuer does the Joe Pesci impersonation. It kind of made his career that he did it so well. But I remember at the 1991 Academy Awards when Goodfellas was up. And spoiler alert, Scorsese should have won Best Director and it should have won Best Picture. And I am a major Kevin Costner fan. But come on, please. But Joe Pesci, when he was being interviewed on the red carpet, not the red carpet, he was being interviewed before I guess you could call it the red carpet. It wasn't Joan Rivers yet. It was 34 years ago. But when he was being interviewed, they asked him, was he nervous? And he said, yeah. He said, well, what are your hopes for the evening? Like, what do you want to see? I think the interviewer was asking for a broader question as far as, are you hoping that Goodfellas wins? It was not like a gotcha or a weird question. But Pesci didn't answer what she said. He basically said, I want to win an Oscar. He just threw it out there. He didn't, the spirit of, I don't like that it's a competition. He could have done a Dustin Hoffman. I don't accept that I'm better than this person in this role. He just said, I'm here and I hope I win. And when he won, it was not a surprise. And the crazy thing with Goodfellas, and I talked about this, but way at the beginning of the channel, and I might have to revisit the episode because so many more of you have started to tune in. It is difficult to, number one, it's difficult to fathom what I'm about to tell you about Goodfellas, but it's also difficult when you finish a film, as Martin Scorsese, when he wrapped Goodfellas and when he finished editing it, you can have a certain level of confidence that the movie is going to be good. If you're someone like me, just knowing the cast, the source material, Nick Pileggi's book, Wise Guy, they couldn't call the movie Wise Guy because there was the TV show with Ken Wall around the same time. But you could have a certain level of comfort and confidence. This is not going to be a terrible movie. This is not going to be, the pedigree is too strong. The actors, the director, the source material. When Scorsese wrapped Goodfellas, he screened it for the studio heads at Warner Brothers, or they screened it. I don't know exactly if he presented it. That part of it, I'm not sure. None of this was reported at the time because it's 1990. There's no social media. There's nothing. But the studio heads were convinced that the film was a disaster. And they made no mention of, but at least Pesci knocks it out of the park, or, wow, Ray Liotta is great. Lorraine Bracco's great. I like the period details. Marty did such a beautiful job. No. The executives just thought the film was disastrous. And I know there was a test screening in this right around this time that also was not good, but I don't know how closely connected those were as far as a timeline. And this information actually came from Julie Salamon's book on the making of The Bonfire of the Vanities, which turned out to also be, that turned out to be a disaster for Warner Brothers. And the sick part was the Warner Brothers executives who screened Bonfire of the Vanities thought it was a masterpiece while wondering if they could even release Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas. We're going to have to take a tax write-off. This is horrendous. Scorsese kept coming back to the same problem and issue that these executives had. Number one, did you not see what Joe did in this film? Did you not see? Do you not think that is a best actor, supporting actor performance? Did you not get the strength of that? So Scorsese is not somebody who tries to be contentious. He wasn't going to start screaming at the studio executives. Bear in mind, it's not little old Martin Scorsese in his 80s. He was still in his 40s at the time. But he tried to talk some sense into the executives. Kept saying, I made the movie you contracted me to make. Bobby's great. Joe is spectacular. Ray is tremendous. I don't know what you're talking about. He managed to convince them. Let's just take this film to the New York Film Festival. And so that's a much longer story than I just told you in the last couple of minutes. But the studio executives were ready to punt Goodfellas entirely, which is completely insane. But it shows nobody knows anything. Sometimes you get it right, and other times it's just a miss. And those executives didn't want to have a negative opinion of Goodfellas. And when the film finally opened at the New York Film Festival and critics went through the ceiling, they were overjoyed. They weren't angry. They were happy that they had been wrong. Oh my God, we're going to win Oscars. Well, yeah, you sure as fuck are, especially Joe Pesci. So he continued to work after winning the Oscar, but not in the same capacity, because that Oscar win, in a similar vein, for better or worse, as years later when Kevin Spacey won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for, I almost said 7, for Usual Suspects, it catapulted him onto the A-list, where even though Kevin Spacey, not a conventional leading man, he was closer to a 70s leading man physically. Charles Bronson, Roy Scheider, Dustin Hoffman, that kind of leading man. Just a great actor, not necessarily Robert Redford, or if you're talking about today, Henry Cavill. It's just different. But he then got to headline big movies, and he was great. My Cousin Vinny is, to me, a top 10 big studio comedy of the decade. And I mentioned yesterday in talking about Steve Martin's LA Story, that's another one. And that was from the previous year. It would be an interesting list to compile just for fun, and none of this is precise. The best big studio comedies of the 90s. Steve Martin's LA Story, I would probably have in the top 10. And I think My Cousin Vinny, I think it's practically a masterpiece because a lot of the legal maneuverings are at least somewhat believable. All the stuff with him with the name, Joey Gallo, Joey Callow, all of that is not necessarily believable. But the nuts and bolts of the case is not that crazy. And it's a pretty good mystery. What the hell happened at the Sack of Suds? Who was it? We know it wasn't, Ralph Macchio. What the hell happened? Pesci allows Marissa Tomei to kind of do the heavy lifting with the comedy. And not surprisingly, she knocks it out of the park, and she won a Best Supporting Actress Oscar. So there was like the common theme, Joe Pesci winning Best Supporting Actor for films released in 1990, and Marissa Tomei, his co-star in My Cousin Vinny, winning Best Supporting Actress for films released in 1992. And Joe had a really interesting cameo in the movie A Bronx Tale. I'm pretty sure he did it as a favor to De Niro, who was the director, the filmmaker there. Chaz Palminteri had done, I think, a one-man play. I don't know if it was a full stage play. I think that it was a one-man thing, and then maybe it became a stage play, and then it became the movie. I'm not 100% on that. But Pesci's cameo is a highlight of the film. Many people would say it's the best part of the film because it comes out of nowhere. You're not expecting it. And then he did a movie in 94 where he did not play the lead. He had two movies in 94, one of which he was a lead, a film called Jimmy Hollywood, directed by a great filmmaker in Barry Levinson. Two thumbs down, not a good movie at all. But he took a pretty interesting supporting turn or supporting role in the Brendan Fraser, Patrick Dempsey, Moira Kelly, Josh Hamilton, not the baseball player, film called With Honors. And it was not entirely successful. It's one of those movies that we Gen Xers have a soft spot for because Brendan was so young, and who doesn't love Patrick Dempsey regardless of what generation you're from. And it's kind of on the nose and pat and silly, but Brendan Fraser and Joe Pesci have really good chemistry. And from a different brand of chemistry, Moira Kelly and Brendan Fraser, they look really good together. I mean, they look really good. They look like they are enjoying the various kissing scenes in the, spoiler alert, latter stages of the movie. There are just some films that are not good, and With Honors is not a good movie, but Pesci is very funny. It's another character that, although a comedic character, he's very serious in his own way. The character is dying. He wants to reconnect with his son, and he is going to inadvertently teach life lessons. It's a little ridiculous to Brendan Fraser's main character of Monty. It has a good arc. Joe's character has an interesting arc. What was his name? Simon Wilder. An interesting arc. And Brendan Fraser's character also kind of grows and changes. It's a film that probably should have done a little bit better than with critics. I think it's in the 20s on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't think it's that bad. It's one of those movies, though, I must have seen 15 times. HBO and Cinemax, circa 1995. They just ran it in an endless loop. It was crazy. But Joe was not somebody who needed it. There are people in the business that have to act and they have to continue because they don't know what else to do. You look at Harrison Ford. He's older than Joe Pesci. He hasn't taken any breaks. And it was even a joke. Somebody in a recent interview with Harrison Ford was talking about, Captain America, where Harrison plays Red Hulk. He said, what are some of your goals at this point in life? With a straight face, Harrison Ford said to stop working. Now, I don't know what his net worth is, but I'm going to go out on that big limb and say that Harrison Ford does not really have to work. Maybe he's trying to will himself to simply walk away. I mean, Sean Connery, who played his dad in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, that's a movie that's now more than 35 years old. Sean Connery retired at 72. He had enough. And no amount of cajoling, unlike with Joe Pesci, no amount of begging and pleading from Harrison and from Steven Spielberg, because there were a couple of Indiana Jones 4 screenplays that would have featured Henry Jones Sr. Boy, I wish they had done that instead of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Just throwing that out there. I do not like that movie. Dial of Destiny, yes. First three Indiana Jones films, masterpiece, masterpiece, masterpiece. Part 4, not good. Part 5, pretty good. Thanks, I'll be here all week. That's my Indiana Jones wrap up in 30 seconds or less. But some people just don't know what to do. Joe Pesci is somebody who is okay not working. And ironically, since The Irishman, he has been busy. He has made movies. He did the film, I forgot who else is in it, but a film where he plays a father of a boxer. It actually just played at a couple of film festivals. It was completed in 2023. Was it The Night of the Fighter or something like that? But there were people that said it was one of the best films that they had seen, recently. I guess in 2024. So he's still a vital presence. He is still somebody who commands attention on screen, and it's not an easy thing to do, as he does in The Irishman. The scenes with De Niro, he dominates. Because unfortunately, De Niro's character, Frank Sheeran, is just it's not that great of a character. And was it Russell Bufalino was the real guy that Joe played? Was actually a pretty fascinating guy, but he's a horrendous human being. Let's just point that out. He is awful. But Joe imbues him with little bits of humanity, where this is not somebody we would ever want to meet, and not because he's going to bump us off, but just because he's a scumbag. But Joe gives him these little moments of humor and humanity. It's a great performance, and I was a little disappointed. I love Brad Pitt, big fan. I'm happy that he won an Oscar, but Joe could have very easily took the Best Supporting Actor award because he is just great in The Irishman. And I don't know if he's working on anything right now. I'm not sure. If he doesn't, if he's had enough and walks away, what an incredible career. What a great actor, and what a natural character, and somebody who just had enormous skill and talent in more fields than you can shake the proverbial stick at. So happy 82nd birthday to one of the unquestioned GOATs of film acting, Joe Pesci. This has been episode number 442 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your late Sunday afternoon here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then,